Hello, and welcome to another Elevate Your Running podcast episode. My name is Sarah Mandershed, and I'm here with my co-host, Austin Myers. And today we have a special guest with us. We are so excited to have the creator behind Running Explained with us, Elisabeth Scott. We are going to be talking all about heart rate and heart rate training. This is going to be an incredible topic, a topic that Austin and I have wanted to tackle for a very long time. And now we have, in my opinion, the expert in heart rate training. So we have some incredible things that we want to go over today with everyone. But before we kick off that episode, we are going to start with our elevated moments. So Austin, hello, how are you? And would you like to share your elevated moment for the week?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm doing really well. Coming off of a busy weekend, which is exactly where my elevated moment lies. This past weekend was the Austin Marathon, which was a big deal for multiple reasons. First and foremost, it was my girlfriend Abby's first marathon and an opportunity for me to be a supporter and run around the course like she has for me so many times. So I feel like I actually got a pretty good workout in on marathon day, just getting around the course and definitely a little bit better at understanding the layout of Austin, Texas and the inner city. But another big reason it is my elevated moment is because the company that I work for, Bear Performance Nutrition, was an official sponsor of the race. That is an area that we're really going to dive into this year as a company and sponsoring marathons and other big events throughout the country. So it was exciting to bring that community together and see the energy of the city on race day. And as we all know, marathons are just a ton of fun. So definitely a busy weekend. Looking forward to a little bit calmer of a weekend here in the next week or so. But it's one of those times where you put out a lot of energy, but you're getting that energy right back. So definitely an elevated moment.
That's incredible. It was so fun to watch your stories all weekend. You were at the expo representing BPN. You were, I believe, on a scooter at some point on Sunday, scooting around Austin to help find Abby and support her. And it was incredible to just watch the entire community of Austin and BPN kind of come together. And it just looked like so much fun out there. And I haven't been to Austin for that marathon. I had a few athletes of my own that ran really strong races, so I was really proud of them, but it just looked like everyone was having fun, and you don't always get that vibe on marathon weekend.
It was a very well supported race, definitely like a party atmosphere. It is not an easy course. So
Yeah.
you need all the positive energy you can get out there, but there was a lot of it. So yeah, it was a great experience. Sarah, what is your elevated moment for the week?
Yeah. Okay. So we were talking about this before we recorded. I have a few, and I think I'm going to save some of them for later episodes because I really want to spend the majority of our time today talking to our guest. So I'm going to keep this super quick, and I feel like it also relates to our topic today. I ran a really great training run on Saturday that I was really proud of. I think my weakest area as an athlete is running hills, and I am running the Boston Marathon this year, which is a very hilly course. It's not easy, and I was able to really get my heart rate in check for a 10K hilly tempo. And what we really wanted to see was a really nice push on the uphill and a really nice recovery on the downhill. I was able to recover on the downhill very, very quickly, and the pace is aligned with where I want to be in training right now. So that feels really good. And it was an elevated moment because for me, running hills is just so hard. So to kind of see all that work coming together and knowing that what I'm doing is actually working. And if you don't know why it's important that my heart rate leveled out and really like went back to a zone that it should have in the recovery part, we are going to talk about that today with our guest, Elisabeth Scott from Running Explained. So with that, hi, Elisabeth, welcome to the show. And would you like to celebrate with your elevated moment?
Hi guys, thanks for having me. Yes, I would love to celebrate with my elevated moment. And I have two, and in my mind, they are equally important, and I'll explain why, but they're both hill related, Sarah, because I'm also running Boston. I think you and I had very similar elevated moments this weekend. I had a monster hilly long run with some pace work on Sunday. There was over 1,000 feet of gain and loss, and I just felt so dialed in. And it was, not an easy run. Not every long run should be easy, depending on what you're training for, although many of them should be. And it was just, I mean, for me, hills are a challenge, but I also know myself as an athlete. When I am in the position to, I excel at downhill racing, not like downhill race courses, but I can harness the power of the downhill. So something I effectively worked on was like intentionally beating up my quads early in the run so that I could then learn to run on destroyed quads. But I didn't even beat them up very effectively, which made me very happy, which means that all of my training is coming together at just the right time, doing all these right things that pay off. It just takes a while sometimes. And my second elevated moment is also hill related, that I did my hard uphills in the freezing rain after today's hilly 8 mile easy run. Normally, I would have skipped it. I would have said, Elisabeth, you ran so many hills this weekend and you just ran hills in your easy run and it's freezing rain out. But part of my commitment to myself this year is doing those little things that help you reach excellence, not just kind of coast along and do enough. So that commitment to me was, for me, an elevated moment.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love that so much. And I feel like, yes, we're both running Boston, which I'm really excited about. And it feels like our training is just very synced up right now. I had a very similar run today. It was hilly. And I 100% agree. And we've talked about this on the podcast so many times that it's like the 1%, it's the needle movers that are going to, when you combine all those things, you create a very strong and unstoppable athlete. So when the athlete starts to cut corners, it's a very slippery slope on what you're able to create on race day. And with Boston, you don't want to be cutting any corners unless you're going into it for like a very fun run that could turn into a run walk.
Yeah, like I am that's would be my first Boston, and I am there to genuinely give it my best effort.
Yeah.
And I and whatever your goal is whenever you decide to run a race, whatever that might be, you don't, not every race that you decide to run has to be a race where you go all out. But yeah, for me, like I'm not gonna show up there underprepared. Like I'm gonna know I did everything that I possibly could before race day to prepare myself for that course.
Yeah, good job. That's incredible. And that would be the advice and feedback I'd give to anyone going into their first Boston. This is now my second, so maybe I know a little too much. And I feel maybe, I mean, I'm definitely nervous going into it because I know what the course is like, but also setting myself up for success to run as strong as possible. So unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, today's episode is not about the Boston Marathon. So we're going to get into it. I briefly stated at the very beginning of our episode, Elisabeth Scott is the creator and founder of Running Explained. And you might know Running Explained from Instagram, YouTube. She has an incredible podcast. So if you haven't subscribed to that, you have to do that. And I really, really encourage you to. It's an incredible podcast where you get to learn so many different things about running and the ins and outs. And it's all dialed into a very like understandable way to, or a very easy way to understand the topics that we all crave to like learn more about as athletes. And Elisabeth is a running coach. She has an incredible team of coaches with her, and she's also an athlete. So with that, hi, Elisabeth. Thanks for joining the
Yeah,
show.
so excited to be here. It's gonna be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. So, we are going to talk about heart rate training today, but before we dive into that, we do want to just get to know you a little bit better as like a human and as an athlete. Like you created this incredible Instagram account, and I start there because that's how I found you a few years ago. Like where did that passion for running like come from, and how did that translate into starting Running Explained?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think if anybody knew me like 15 years ago and they said, what do you mean she's a running coach? Like, what do you mean she teaches people about running? Like her? It's not that, I was decently athletic growing up, but I was not a runner. And I really only started running in my late 20s after I quit drinking because I wanted to lose weight. Like that's literally why I started running. I signed up for a 5K to hold myself accountable because I wanted to lose weight after I quit drinking. And it just unlocked this thing in me where I think a lot of the preconceived notions or the stories that we tell ourselves about who we are, and as we're growing up, some the work that we do on ourselves, whether explicitly or implicitly, I kind of up until that point had this story that I was telling myself about who I was as a person. I was pretty good at a lot of things, but I had no willpower and I had no follow through. And when the going got hard, I got going, and, all these things about who I was. And running has allowed me to, I feel like, become the person that I really was always supposed to be, and allowed me to change my own narrative about who I am and like what I believe I can do. And so that's really why I think running is so powerful and important, just as not even just like as a sport, but as something that teaches us the best parts of ourselves.
That's huge. Yeah. I mean, it's always bigger than running. And that's something that we try to continue to come back to on this podcast. We love to get into the topics that make us better runners, but we love to also acknowledge how running makes us better people. And I think that everyone on this podcast right now and everyone listening would agree that it does that for them. You can take this question in either way, whether it be, what have you learned about running in the process of growing Running Explained, or what have you learned about yourself in the process of growing Running Explained from the beginning to where you are now?
I mean, I've obviously learned so much about running. And what I think is interesting, I don't even think I answered your question fully, Sarah, but like, why did I even start this? It's because, I'm a very naturally curious person. I don't think that you could do what I do and not be naturally curious. Like my husband jokes with my best friend is Google. Like you ask me a question, I'm like, I need to know the answer. It's kind of compulsive sometimes, but it really, discovering that running was something you could learn about, and like there were answers to these questions, really fueled this fire in me of like, oh, not only is there an explanation for all of this, but there's a huge why behind it. And I love the science and I love the medical side and I love the psychology, and like it's this perfect intersection of all these things that I find fascinating. And so like all the things that I've learned about running have really just kind of, to bring it back, so like have learned about just to be like a healthier human. I think, because like I said, I started running for weight loss, and now one of the things I almost preach about is like, you need to fuel your body for health and performance. When I started running, I was running everything way too fast, right? And I preach now, what do you need to do? You need to spend so much time in your delicious little easy effort zone to get all the benefits of aerobic endurance that are going to be hiding there, not in those higher intensity zones. And so why I started Running Explained in the first place, because I basically saw this huge, not that there was one, but what I saw is that there was a huge gap in knowledge targeted at everyday, intelligent, but new runners, right? And there was like, nobody seemed like they were talking about the fact you need to slow down on your easy days, slow way all the way down, or that you need to, do this, you need to do that. And so what I've learned about running a business in the past 3 years, Kim, it's already been 3 years I've been doing this, is that there is no end to the amount of people who are coming into the sport as new runners every day, who are going to benefit from just the education that me and like you guys are putting out there about how to become a better runner kind of at all levels. I used to think that like one day I was going to run out of stuff to post, and I know that's certainly not true. It's been a wild ride.
Yeah, it's so funny that, in prepping for this podcast, not even in prepping for this podcast, in prepping for the Austin Marathon and looking at Abby's goal for her marathon and just what the day was going to look like on the course, you made a post, I believe it was late last week, on like specific marathon goal times and the pace that a runner would need to hold for that. And it popped up on my Instagram, and it was like, oh, perfect. It's so convenient. And that's what I've found with your content, is that number one, it's so accessible. And then number two, it's something that provides true value, but also in a simple form and in a way that we don't have to continue to dig into the research. You're giving us something that we can take away and then apply. So that's been really powerful from what I've seen from you and the content that you're putting out through Running Explained. And I think is something that we try to do on this podcast as well, is we don't want to give you information and then make it more complicated in discussing that information. We want to, in a way, help you end your search on that specific topic, but also sparked the curiosity for some more information moving forward.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. Because as you know, some of these things that we discuss as coaches and athletes are incredibly complex. They're incredibly detailed. And, any coaching certification or any book you open and say, what are you going to say the most? You're going to say it depends. As a coach, what is the answer to this? The answer is it depends. And because there's so much individualization that comes to, approaching this sport. And I will be the first to raise my hand and admit that there is a lot of nuance that I have to necessarily cut out of my posts sometimes. Do I want them to be the most simplified version of what I'm trying to get across? No, but I can't write a thesis on every single Instagram topic that I cover. But I do love that. It's like sparking the conversation, kind of, always leaving the door open for, generally speaking, this is what we're looking for. But there are other ways to approach this, or digging into different, kind of the new research that's coming up all the time about, different areas of the sport. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun.
Well, one of the more nuanced topics that we want to get into today and really dive deep into is heart rate training. Heart rate training is definitely a buzzword or a buzz phrase in the running community. And it's something that I think, as a runner who wants to progress, I've been there and I'm always there in wanting to progress. It's something that you do your research on and you gain some clarity, but then you also kind of get into the weeds and you continue to try to question different aspects of it. So we'll start simple and then we'll dive even deeper into it as our conversation progresses. First and foremost, what is heart rate training? And then maybe you can also expand on why heart rate training is beneficial for anyone who wants to progress as a runner.
Great question. Simply put, heart rate training is a way of using your heart rate to guide what intensity zone you are in when you are running. So using heart rate, beats per minute, your pulse, right? Heart rate as a proxy or a measurement of your intensity. And we talk about proper training and training for specific things. One of the things that we really need to pay attention to is, what intensity zone are we in? Are we in the proper intensity zone for that day? If it's supposed to be easy effort, is it easy enough? If we're aiming for a threshold workout, are we in the correct zone there? So there's a way, like I said, using this heart rate information to help guide us and make sure we're in the proper intensity zone on the day and for the purpose of the training that we're trying to execute. And I will say, not everybody is interested in using heart rate in their training. Some people genuinely find it more confusing than other methods. It is but one tool in the tools that is available to you as a runner. So I'm not sitting here saying you must train by heart rate, or if you're trying to progress, you have to use heart rate in your training. I will say I find it an extraordinarily beneficial tool, because what I personally believe about it is that you can't cheat it, because you're either in the right zone or you're not in the right zone. And for a lot of us runners who like to kind of push the pace or skirt the rules or say, but it felt easy, coach, I promise it felt easy. Your heart rate doesn't lie. And so it really lays bare what you're doing, whether or not you think you're doing the right thing. The heart rate will tell you what's actually happening inside your body.
Yeah. So true. It's like heart rate training and keeping an eye on heart rate, especially on those easy days, can be frustrating, because you want the heart rate to be lower than it is at all times, and you want the pace to be faster than it is at all times. So as a runner, from my experience, trying to go just based off of feel, you quickly fool yourself into believing that you feel better than you do, because running in that gray zone of a little too hard to be easy and a little too easy to be a workout is not ultimately going to be beneficial. That would be my next question, though, of why is that gray zone not beneficial? Why do we need to find those areas of our heart rate training to progress as a runner? Where is the benefit there?
Yeah. So first I'll say, we're describing something that's called intensity blindness, and it's incredibly common. So when runners are used to running everything in this moderate zone or in a hard zone, and they slow slow down and they say, well, it feels easy compared to the stuff I'm doing that's super hard. Just because it feels easier doesn't mean it's fully, truly all the way easy. And so that's when using something like heart rate can basically force you to understand what easy effort is actually supposed to feel like. And in all of this training with heart rate, the goal is not to be glued to your watch for the rest of your life. The goal is for you to learn what these different intensities feel like using heart rate so that you can become more in tune with your body, so that you don't have to watch your watch all the time. You can go for an easy run without oh my God, am I in the right zone or not? Eventually, that should be something that you intuitively feel. But what we're trying to specifically do with heart rate, and I would say most of the time when I'm using heart rate in training, it really is to stay in our true easy effort zone, right? So easy zone, zone 2, conversational pace, whatever you want to call it. This is a low intensity zone that is below what is called the moderate zone. Some people call it the gray zone. It's called the gray zone because it's gray, right? It's neither black nor white. It's neither hard nor easy. It's moderate. Now, this moderate zone is traditionally, when we talk about training intensity distribution, the way that it's done in the lab, it's a 3-zone model. So zone 1 is the easy effort zone. Zone 2 is your moderate intensity zone. Zone 3 is your high intensity zone. And so this moderate intensity zone has a lot of benefits in a very specific context. But if you're hanging out there in this moderate intensity zone, accumulating lactate, accumulating fatigue, burning through glycogen at a higher rate than you should be, if instead of being in your true easy effort zone, you're not actually on an easy run. So there are a lot of things that happen in your easy effort zone that don't happen or don't happen to the same degree when you're in your moderate intensity zone. So many runners get caught up in not understanding that faster does not equal more effective, right? So all of these zones that we're going to talk about today have value. It just depends on if you're deploying them correctly. And if you're in a moderate zone on a day you're supposed to be in an easy zone, you are not running properly on that day. Does moderate zone training have a place in your training intensity distribution? Probably, but not on an easy day. And that's when the heart rate becomes really beneficial, because you can't escape whether your heart rate's low or high. Like, it is what it is, as long as you're measuring it correctly.
So let's talk about that easy effort zone. What is happening physiologically that's allowing us to adapt as runners? Because I know for me, it's like, I need to know why I'm doing this if it's something that I already have some resistance to. So for runners who may not love running easy and actually holding themselves accountable to keeping that heart rate low, what is the benefit there? What's happening?
Yeah. And this is where, talk about making this knowledge approachable. Some people come at this from the super sciencey side. Some people come at it from the kind of metaphor side. I like to say that easy effort is the foundation of your training. It is the cake upon which all of your frosting, all your fast, sexy work is going to be built. It is what allows you to build the endurance that you're trying to build so that you can run faster over longer distances. So when we talk about how do I become a better runner, if you're talking about running a 5K or longer, you're really talking about how do I improve my endurance? And that starts with your easy effort training. When you are below your aerobic threshold, which is the technical definition for the top of your easy effort zone, right? So we want to stay below our aerobic threshold. We talk about what that means heart rate zone wise, et cetera, et cetera. There are some things that are happening in your body and some things that aren't happening in your body. This is a very simplified explanation. But broadly speaking, in this low intensity zone, your body is using primarily aerobic methods of energy production instead of anaerobic, right? So all of your energy systems are on all the time. It's just when your energy demands are relatively low, like in your easy effort zone, your anaerobic system is kind of just like quietly ticking over, right? But your aerobic lipolysis, right? So burning fatty acids for fuel, that's going full bore. And then your aerobic glycolysis, burning carbohydrates with oxygen, is also going. Below your aerobic threshold, the majority of your energy is going to be coming from these aerobic energy productions and also primarily from fatty acids. Why does this matter? Why is it important? And you might be confused here about, wait, is this about fat burning? Technically, yes, but not in the traditional fitnessy sense of like, oh, you're burning belly fat. No, you're burning fatty acids. It's cool and awesome to burn fatty acids because you get so much energy from such a small amount of fatty acid compared to burning carbohydrate. And the byproducts are carbon dioxide and water, right? So if you could effectively learn to burn fat for fuel at high quantities, you have a huge source of fuel, right? With no byproducts that can power you. And power you, what does it mean? It means run fast. Now, the problem is that above our aerobic threshold, our energy demands increase such that other energy systems start kicking on to contribute to fuel, right? That's when anaerobic energy production increases. Long story short, why am I talking about this when talking about easy effort running? Because when we're in our easy effort zone, we want to be burning primarily fatty acids for fuel because our aerobic threshold is a trainable attribute, meaning that over time, we can actually move it upwards. If we can move our aerobic threshold upwards, we can do all the things we want to do in our aerobic easy zone at faster paces, burning more fatty acids for fuel. We are building our capillary network, capillaries bringing blood to our skeletal muscle tissues. It's really cool. You can see they do like cross sections of skeletal muscle tissue before and after aerobic training. And in the before picture, there's this like skeletal muscle fiber with like one sad little capillary. And then afterwards, there's just surrounded by capillaries, right? So capillaries are like roads, bringing all the supplies to your powerhouses. Your powerhouses, your mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell. Easy effort running improves your mitochondrial density, right? So what are you doing? You are improving the systems in your body that are allowing you to, 1, improve endurance, 2, improve energy production, 3, improve efficiency, and 4, run faster overall and in general. There's other stuff too. We talk about fatigue resistance, we talk about slow twitch muscle fibers, we talk about bone remodeling and all these types of things. But the point is that having a crazy, super strong aerobic monster base allows you to raise the floor of your training, not just the ceiling, right? A rising tide lifts all boats. If you can make your aerobic base stronger and more efficient, everything above it is going to get faster just by being related to your aerobic base. And then you can sprinkle in all that fun, sexy, race-specific speed work and get all the extra benefits you're trying to get from that.
So we're acclimating as endurance athletes by running easy. What does that look like? Let's just say on a weekly basis. You can give us percentages. You can give us a breakdown based off days per week, whatever you feel like is most approachable for our audience. What does it look like as far as distribution between that easy pace effort as opposed to more speed, higher intensity efforts?
Yeah, so this really depends on what your experience is as a runner, what phase of training you're currently in, and what your goals are, right? So for novice runners, right, or runners who are building volume, whether inside or outside of a race specific training cycle, right? So a lot of first marathon type plans, first half marathon plans, we're just going through a base building phase. That's going to be almost entirely easy effort running. Rarely is your training going to be 100% easy running, because we're always probably going to throw some things in like strides or hill sprints or the random progression run here or there. But there are going to be periods of your training which are almost like 98% easy effort running. So it can range from basically all your running should be easy effort running. And then we talk about okay, kind of getting our feet under us. You're no longer a novice runner. You're comfortable with the volume you're at. You may want to start adding in, or should at some point start adding in, the higher intensity work, right? The speed work, the tempos, the threshold, the goal pace, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, you've probably heard of 80-20 running, right? Oh, 80% of your running should be easy, 20% should be hard. This is one of the training intensity distribution models that is a guide for runners. So it's interesting when they do the research on this 80-20 training intensity distribution, it's that they look at what elite runners are doing, and they do studies on this too to kind of back this up. And they look at what elite runners are doing, and they say, generally speaking, the best of the best are following this rough training intensity distribution. But that's over kind of like the entirety of their training cycle, and sometimes even their training year. So an elite athlete might start, not saying we should compare ourselves to elites, right? But I want to give you some context for how different this training intensity distribution can be depending on who you are. They might start out doing 95% easy effort running in a base building phase, but by the time they're in peak week for their half marathon build, they're doing like 60-40. Now, I'm not saying that you should go out and do that, but the point is that your training intensity distribution, although it will change throughout your training cycle, it's always still going to be mostly easy effort running, right? Very rarely you see somebody doing 80% speed work, right? We're not middle distance runners. We're not sprinters. The easy effort running is still the foundation of your training. So if you're following a classic 80-20 split, let's just say, because it's really easy to conceptualize, what does that look like? Well, It's about session intensity, not calculating, well, I did 1.5 warm up and that's easy effort. And I did, 10 by 400 and that's the, no. If you did a hard session, the whole session counts as hard. If you did an easy session, even if it had strides at the end, the whole session counts as easy. So if you're running 5 days a week in an 80-20 split, 3 of those days should be easy effort. And then 2 of them are going to be not easy. Now, some people say 80-20 is easy and then very hard, as we skip over moderate entirely. And that is one way of doing that's polarized 80-20. Other models of 80-20 are just, like I said, 80% easy, 20% not easy. And that can include moderate intensity. But that would be like a rough guideline. Now, for anybody who's like trying to figure out how to train, I will always recommend that they follow a plan or connect with a coach or receive some guidance, right? The stuff that we are talking about is not rocket science, but if you're going to make up your own training, you at least have to know what you're doing before you start making it up. The other thing that's really cool, and this is becoming something that's being talked about more, is more of a pyramidal intensity training distribution. And this is where you still have the majority of your training as an easy effort, but we talk about mostly for marathon and half marathon, you have a giant chunk that's essentially in that moderate intensity zone. And then a little bit on top, that's that high intensity. So this might be something like a 70% easy effort, 20 to 25% moderate intensity, and then like a 5% high intensity split. This would be something that's going to be more appropriate for a higher volume experienced marathoner or half marathoner. If you're running 20 miles a week, that split's probably not for you. But if you're in the 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 mile per week range, pyramidal training intensity distribution is probably going to be something you're going to see on your plan.
Absolutely. That's great advice. Elisabeth, what would you suggest for an athlete who is just getting into running and they don't know their heart rate zones? Like, how do they find that out?
Yeah. So as a new athlete, I bet you that you can probably reach your maximum heart rate pretty easily just by running hard for a couple minutes. I mean, I remember when I was new, when I started running, I literally could not run a mile. Could not do it. Couldn't even, not even get close. Now, my best advice for my past self would have been, girl, take walk breaks. It's okay. You can slow down. But I think, like I said, as a new athlete, we have this thing called intensity blindness, right? And so where's a new athlete start? Do you need to use heart rate in your training? No. But if you want to, you need to start off with understanding your maximum heart rate. That's kind of the underpinning of where all this comes from. Don't use an age-based formula. Those are not appropriate for individual usage. They are intended for displaying a best fit line on a graph of scatter points from population data. So you need to actually know what your maximum heart rate is. Now, of course, the whole like medical advice and like, please don't do something that's going to hurt you, yada, yada. But you need to know what your maximum heart rate is. And then you can very easily set up a simple 5-zone heart rate model. So what I said before, that easy effort zone, it's really the one we're going to be aiming for. And as a new runner, I betcha most people who are new runners are going to be using run walk in their training. And that's an amazingly beneficial tool. So don't be afraid if you need to take walk breaks. But the goal of using heart rate in our training, like I said before, is to make sure that we're spending the right amount of time in the intended intensity zone for that day. So if you're using heart rate in your training, you're going to want to make sure your heart rate is staying in the zone it's supposed to be in. So your easy effort zone. Throw out some random fake numbers, and I'm just going to make up for a hypothetical athlete. We have an athlete whose maximum heart rate is 200. 75% of that rough aerobic threshold is going to be about 150 beats per minute. We want this athlete to stay under 150 beats per minute on their easy run. We want them to run at an easy effort, slow conversational pace until their heart rate rises above that 150 threshold. And then we want them to slow down to a walk until their heart rate recovers. And then we want to rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. And why do I like heart rate based run walk intervals more than time-based run walk intervals? Because we want your aerobic base to grow and change with time. And if we lock ourselves into time-based intervals, we're not giving ourselves the chance to grow and change with our changing aerobic base. So for a lot of people with run walk, the goal is 100% easy running. If you're locked into time-based intervals, you kind of have to guess whether you're in the right time-based interval or not. Heart rate-based training allows you to organically do the run that's most effective for you on that day and naturally follow the intervals that are most effective over time. Running more walking less until boom, you're 100% walking or running one day.
Yeah, that's incredible. And what would some outside factors impact heart rate?
Yeah, I mean, there are a ton. And the other thing, kind of the caveat to all this is, guys, I think I said this as a throwaway earlier. You have to make sure that the data you're even getting is correct. And this is, yes, another thing you probably have to buy. If you're genuinely interested in using heart rate information in your training, I'd recommend getting a heart rate strap, either a heart rate chest strap or a heart rate armband. The optical sensor on your watch is simply not reliable enough for you to use in your training in this way. It's just not. Heart rate, optical heart rate sensors are influenced by where your blood vessels are in your wrist, your skin color, if it can be prone to cadence lock. Sometimes it's right and sometimes it's wrong, and sometimes it's low and sometimes it's high. Like, I've seen the weirdest stuff from my optical sensor over the years, and I just don't even trust it anymore. That's why I train with a heart rate strap. So if you are going to be using heart rate data in your training, you have to make sure that it is being accurately measured. That's probably the number one question I get from people. Why is my heart rate so high on runs that are fully conversational? Your data is wrong. Like, just think about that for a minute. If you are fully conversational on your easy effort run and your heart rate's in the 180s, what do you think's going on there? Do you think that maybe you're actually in a 180 effort zone, or do you think maybe your watch is wrong, right? But for some people, what they kind of get the opposite effect. They say, struggling to slow down my easy runs and my heart rate's really high. That can't be correct. I'm like, well, actually, it probably is. But anyways, a lot of things that can actually impact your heart rate. So let's assume, listener, that you have an accurately measured heart rate and your data is shipshape and reasonably correct. There are a lot of things that can impact your heart rate that I like to say are underlying signals of just what's going on in your body, right? So if you go on a run and your heart rate is abnormally elevated, think about it. Are you dehydrated? Is it humid? Did you choose a hilly route? Are you underfueled? Are you super stressed? Right? So that's why I say, like, heart rate doesn't lie. It reveals what's actually going on in our bodies, whether or not we want to see it. So yes, I think the number one thing is you have to make sure that your heart rate's being accurately measured, but there are, of course, going to be situations where your heart rate is going to be elevated just based on the conditions that you're running in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I recently started using a heart rate strap, and I have to say it is so great to actually see like true data when I'm running versus my watch was always showing a higher heart rate than I thought it was. I'm like, but I'm running so easy. How am I in the 150s? Like, this doesn't make any sense. So if anyone is thinking about getting a heart rate strap, I highly, highly, highly recommend it. And also, I think it's such a huge, important piece of like knowing outside factors when you are going out for a run. So if maybe you didn't get great sleep the night before, or you drank a huge cup of coffee before your run, or you're running a hilly route like Elisabeth and I did today, like sometimes you get to shift your pace around to make sure that you are still staying in the right heart rate zone for that day. Like both Elisabeth and I had a recovery run today, right? Like easy, but it was still on rolling hills. So we had to adapt our pace to make sure that it was falling into the right zone. So we were intentional and just intentional with our day and our training. So I
think I was going to say, that's probably a question I get a lot about pace, but like, what pace should I run? Whatever pace that keeps you in your easy zone, right? The only wrong pace on an easy day is a pace that's not easy, right? If you need to slow down 3 minutes per mile slower than marathon pace to keep it easy on the day, you need to. Now, I don't really like to put pace ranges on a lot of this stuff. There are some general guidelines for most people. Your easy effort is going to be at least a minute slower than marathon pace, at least 90 seconds per mile slower than half marathon pace, at least 2 minutes slower than 10K pace. Like, yeah, it's a really slow pace. And I understand for people who are already kind of at the other end of paces, they're thinking, but my 10K pace is 11 minutes per mile. You want me to slow down to 13 minutes per mile? I do. I really, really do. There are no drawbacks here. There are only benefits, right? There's only a good trajectory from here. I promise you, this stuff does work.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I know there is that like comparison trap, right? That athletes fall into of, but you want me to run a 13-minute mile or a run walk 13-minute mile when there's so many other people on Strava doing so many great things, or on Instagram or TikTok or wherever you're comparing yourself to. So it is highly, highly, highly beneficial to just slow your roll and be intentional with your training. And at some point, you're going to turn a corner and you're going to raise the floor, right? And you get to move forward in your training. And I think when you put that work in, you ultimately, and you see the results, you ultimately feel better because of it. And you didn't cut any corners to get there. You did it the right way. So I have a question about the athletes who generally have higher heart rate. How, and let's say they're fit and they just like run high. What advice do you have for them? And do they still fall into that run walk plan, or do you have other advice or different advice for them?
Yeah, so there's a couple things to consider here. One is there something that's influencing your heart rate? Like, are you taking medication that is impacting your heart rate? This would probably be a big one. Like if you're on beta blockers or you're taking a medication that is known to interfere with your heart rate, I would say heart rate training might not be as beneficial for you. And I wouldn't say never, because I do use heart rate training with some of my athletes who are on medication, but we use it in a slightly different way. Like we're just really hyper intentional about being really dialed into that perceived effort and making sure that, like I said, the goal is to use heart rate to understand what zone you're in by feel, right? But to understand that, like, trust but verify, right? And the athlete is, if they're looking at their watch, okay, this says this, but how does it feel? How does it feel? How does it feel? But if you are kind of self-coached or unguided and you are taking a medication that interferes with your heart rate, heart rate training might be, not to say, like I said, not impossible to use, but kind of have an extra layer of complexity on how to deploy it effectively. I do work with athletes who have an absolute crazy range of heart rates. I have athletes who have maximum heart rates in the low 200s. I have athletes with maximum heart rates in the low 160s, right? So the cool thing about heart rate training is that it's hyper individualized, right? And I think this is another thing we see on Strava. If I'm watching somebody else, like I'm going to make this up, Sarah, and say, well, Sarah's easy runs are in the 130s. Why can't I keep my heart rate in the 130s? Well, Sarah and I have completely different heart rate zones, right? So if you are an athlete who has a very, very high maximum heart rate, all of your zones are going to be higher because you're dealing with different numbers. If you have a low maximum heart rate, all your zones are going to be lower. If you are saying that person, how are they running in the 120s? Their maximum heart rate might be 158, right? 120s is their easy zone, right? That's maybe the 140s for you or the 150s. I will say, for people who say, but I swear to God, my heart rate's in the 170s and 180s and it's easy. It's probably not. There could be a medication issue here. There could be an intensity blindness issue here. You could be an outlier. Maybe your maximum heart rate is 230. I don't know. But I think that's more of a, in a lot of those cases, a wishful thinking. Outliers exist, but we all can't be outliers, right? Outliers, not general crowd. So yeah, it's not to say that heart rate training doesn't work if you have a different heart rate. You just need to make sure that your zones are dialed in for what your specific heart rate profile is.
The reoccurring theme that I hear is that heart rate training is individualized. And as the athlete, or if you're working with a coach, the coach has to be able to see the individualized perspective of the athlete. So let's say that the athlete understands heart rate training is valuable. It's the way that they are going to progress. Let's talk a little bit about applications and strategies to make sure that the athlete's staying accountable to their easy days when they need to be running easy. And how can we do that beyond simply understanding that we need to slow down? Because it unfortunately is not that easy when you're out running. You can say, I've done this plenty of times where I'm like, I'm going to run easy today. I really feel like I need to. And maybe the way that I'm trying to talk myself into it is by setting a pace parameter. I'm like, I'm not letting myself run faster than this pace. And then I get out there and I do. And maybe I start looking at my heart rate, and then it just becomes almost that the run is more frustrating than enjoyable. And I think that that's an area that people push back against heart rate training, is they don't want to look at the number. They don't want to feel like that is what their entire run is consisting of. So what can an athlete do to strategically stay within these proper zones that they need to in order to progress and still enjoy their running?
It's a good question. I think it's really going to depend on the specific kind of frustration or concern that the athlete has. And, for a lot of people, they've been used to running in a very specific pace zone for so long. There is a muscle memory component here, right? If you're used to doing all your runs in low zone 3, thinking mistakenly that they're in zone 2, when you kind of zone out, your body is probably going to naturally just speed up a little bit, just because that's the pace that your body is used to running. You're used to generating that much force. You're used to that much, your cadence and that much turnover. This is also something you commonly see with athletes who are returning from injury. Their body remembers the pace that they used to be able to run like 3 or 6 months ago, even though they're not in that place now, right? So it's another layer of frustration coming back from injury. I totally identify with that. But yeah, so there are a couple different things here, and it's almost like the athletes that I've worked with in this capacity, it's almost like you have to have like a moment of acceptance or like a run that clicks. And there may be several weeks of frustration. And I get this. You're like, but it's almost like growing pains or relearning how to do something. Look, change is never fun. Change is never easy. We like to be on our routine. We like to do the things we like to do. But I promise you that as you go through this process of understanding what it means to run easy on your easy days, you just have to kind of like commit to it and get over the weird newness of it. And then it'll start to feel more natural over time. If you're the kind of runner who does not want to be watching, right? You have a couple options in the tools that your watch probably provides. You can, as Austin said, set pace parameters literally in your watch. You can go ahead and set alarms or buzzers or kind of metrics on, I want my watch to buzz at me or beep at me if I run faster than X pace, or if my heart rate goes above X threshold. You'll trust me, it's really annoying to have it keep buzzing at you, and you'll slow down. You will slow way down. You're like, oh my God, I can't deal with this anymore. Fine, I'll slow all the way down. The goal with easy effort running is not to fight it. And I think it's the biggest thing too, is that we as runners go through this period of fighting it because it feels wrong. It feels unnatural. I can't possibly need to slow down this much. This is like, oh my God, this is so frustrating. I have to run so slow. And I think taking that mindset shift of like, I want this run to be slow and enjoyable. I want this run to be easy. In this run, I am winning when my heart rate is low. In this run, it is a success if my pace is in this range, and really flipping the script on how we're defining the success of that particular run. Because if you're expecting to define the success of your easy run the way it should be done with the way that you used to define the measure of success, you are going to be so pissed off because you are measuring it to the completely wrong standard.
Yeah. I see athletes like that all the time, whether I'm coaching them or on Strava or I'm friends with them, specifically athletes who ran in high school and college, and now they're adults and they're trying to get back into it. And they're just trying so hard to run what they used to be able to run and not giving themselves the grace and the patience to slow their roll. And at some point they might get back there, but for right now, they get to be where they are and be okay with that and just lean into it. And I loved your tips on flipping the script with creating a win out of it, of like, yes, it was a low heart rate. Yes, it was, I landed in the pace that I wanted to land or whatever. I have a funny story to share, and then I'll let Austin chime in. So when you were sharing about putting pace or heart rate parameters on your watch, I have done this, and I did it with my heart rate after I ran Boston 21. I started running again, earmuffs, Elisabeth. I started running again 3 days later, and I was not recovered. And you can imagine what was happening with my heart rate. Even though it was through my watch, it was still incredibly frustrating because I'd get back from a run that was like within my easy pace zone, and my heart rate would like skyrocket, and it was a concern. So I put this like parameter on my watch, and I walked into a group run and I started running with athletes, and within like, I don't even think the first mile, it started beeping every 30 seconds, and I could not get it to like turn off. And like the athletes I was running with, they were so like gracious, but I'm sure annoyed because I was annoyed. And the best part about all of it is like every time it beeped, I think it just created like a higher heart rate because I was getting frustrated with it. So anyways, if you're going to do that, either, make sure you're running solo or have maybe some earbuds in or something so people around you don't hear the beeping. But it is a good tool. And that's my story.
For me, I'll say when I was coming back, I took some time off because I was totally burned out. This was a couple of years ago. And I was coming back after, barely running for a couple of months. And so I lost fitness and it was like June. And so I was like, all right, got to get back on the horse. Let's do it. And I was basically starting with run walk. It was also like 95 degrees outside, right? I was slowing way down from where I used to be, which is a huge ego hit. But for me, the win was literally how low can I keep my heart rate? How low can I go? Like if I, for my heart, I was like, oh my God, I saw 130s today, and you may start like you are just barely keeping your heart rate below your easy effort zone. And then you realize you can keep it lower. And then you realize you can keep it lower. And then you realize you can keep it even lower. And so like that to come back from a run and say like my average heart rate was 134, like that was my huge win. And it allowed me to completely separate myself from the paces I was running and having emotions about that, or the distances I was running and feeling feelings about that, right? Because I had the huge win. I knew that I'd done the right thing on that day, and that allowed me to really build back effectively.
Yeah, I'm playing that game right now in training and keeping all easy, very easy. I'm also running really high mileage, and I feel like it's a great way to like stay healthy, stay happy, and not burn myself out. So,
oh my God. And when you're running, so what are you running? Like 70 miles a week right now?
Yeah.
Your easy days, and people always ask like, is my easy pace going to get faster as I get faster? I'm like, to a point. Yeah. But when you're in super high mileage training, your easy paces get slower because you are exhausted.
Tired.
Yeah.
Tired is the name of the game. Yeah. And that's okay. I'm here for it. It's fine. Okay, Austin, it's your turn.
So let's talk, as Sarah was kind of just discussing, like her current training cycle. She's training for a marathon, as a lot of our listeners probably do, half marathon or marathon distance, which is going to require the athlete to have a long run, probably on a weekly basis for the majority of that training cycle for the goal race. What does heart rate training look like in terms of the long run? And understanding that we may have easy long runs, we may have long runs at a specific pace. What does that look like, and what kind of advice do you give to runners on the long run? One thing that Sarah and I discuss a lot is time over distance can be very powerful, because for the athlete going into especially a long run, maybe even just a normal daily easy run, to see how many miles you have to run as opposed to time. You can't manipulate the time. You can run 7 miles at a specific pace and you finish faster. But if you're programmed for 60 minutes, you can't rush 60 minutes. And I think there's a lot of power there in shifting that mindset. So for the long run, where is the benefit in terms of heart rate, and maybe even getting into like over the course of a training cycle, how many of our long runs are going to be just at an easy low heart rate pace? And then where is the value, and when does the value come in working in those paces for maybe a goal effort?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the whole time versus distance thing, I love to use time-based training with my athletes, and I personally train a lot with time. What I tend to find is that when we're in a race-specific training cycle with my athletes, I will definitely start them with time-based long runs, but then at a certain point, after we've gotten 4, 6, 8 weeks of training, I'll probably flip them to distance-based long runs, because I know what paces they're running, right? I don't have to guess anymore. But why do I start with time-based? For exactly that reason you said, Austin, is that we want to make sure that they're spending a specific amount of time in a specific intensity zone, not trying to get freaked out by how many miles they have to run. But I like to see when we talk about long run, progressing in your long run, where do we start? Where do we end up? What is the goal here? What's the appropriate thing? Your long run is such a powerful tool in your training arsenal, but you have to treat it with respect, right? So we do want to start our long runs in our easy effort zone. As in when we start building our volume, your long run should be easy effort. But there's a huge little caveat here, is that easy effort on a long run may mean that you're actually in low zone 3 at the end, because there's something called cardiac drift. Now, there's something called cardiac drift, something called aerobic decoupling. Two similar, basically they're the same, but they're a little bit different. Cardiac drift occurs when your output stays the same, but your heart rate drifts upwards, right? This is common on longer runs, especially, 2 hours plus, because of maybe a little bit of dehydration, a little bit of fatigue, right? Some cardiac drift on easy effort long runs is normal. Now, it may not happen in every long run, but for a couple beats over, right? 5%, little, and it still feels easy. If you swore up and down, no, Coach Elisabeth, I swear to God, that was easy. I know my heart was a little bit, kind of in low zone 3 at the end, but it felt exactly the same. Cool. Not concerned about it. Where I am concerned is when we get to something called aerobic decoupling. And this is different, in a slightly different concept from cardiac drift. And aerobic decoupling is on a long, easy effort, our heart rate and effort drift upwards and our pace stays the same. This tells me that the athlete's aerobic endurance is not strong enough, is not robust enough to sustain aerobic output for the duration of that long run, right? So if we're doing a 2-hour long run and 90 minutes in, the athlete's effort and heart rate start looking like, I don't know, the recent stock market, kind of just up and up and up and up, whatever it's doing now, going down, then going back up again, starts going up and up and up. And they're like, I don't know what happened. Like, it just got really hard at the end. Like, I was running the same pace, but it felt really hard. That's aerobic decoupling. That is an insufficient aerobic endurance, right, to sustain what you're trying to do. What I want an athlete to do in that case, I want the athlete to slow down and stay in their easy effort zone, right? The whole point of an easy effort long run is it stays in your easy effort zone. If it feels easy, you're in the right place. Ideally, that pace will stay roughly the same. If the effort starts to increase, you need to slow down. If your heart rate starts to rise, but the effort stays the same, just keep going. Once an athlete has developed sufficient aerobic endurance in their long run, then it's appropriate to start adding in stuff. And stuff is just, the workouts, the paces, the pickups, the surges, the fast finish, whatever progression, whatever. There's a million different ways you can add stuff to a long run. But I would never add stuff to a long run if the athlete were not capable of running that distance or that duration at an easy effort aerobic endurance first. And I think it's where a lot of people get really frustrated, is that for many people, they're never in their easy effort zone on long runs. And then they are crashing and burning on these workouts or in races, or they can barely finish these long runs because they haven't taken the time to develop that aerobic endurance first. Once you have that aerobic endurance built, your long runs and your long run workouts become the thing that can slingshot you to where you're trying to get to. But you have to put in the work to get to be able to do the long run workouts first.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point and a perspective that I've never had. It raises a question that I hope you have an answer to, because I don't even know if it's a great question. But what does this all translate to on race day? Like, if an athlete's training for a goal, what do we want to happen with our heart rate on race day?
Oh, I don't care. I don't care what your heart rate is on race day, because it's going to be high, and I want it to be high because you're working your ass off. That's the whole point. I would never, ever tell an athlete to race by heart rate. We can look at it after the fact and be like, ooh, look at that. Look how hard you were working. Look how high you managed to keep that heart rate, right? Oh my God. The whole point about racing, and when we all know this, is you do things on race day that you never thought possible. You do things that your body, you're like, I thought I might have been capable of doing that, but actually doing it was like, oh my God, where did that come from? And so the heart rate on race day is interesting after the fact, but not something I would necessarily say like mile 16 or a marathon, you got to make sure your heart rate's in. No, because we want to be working, not like the hardest. No, we wouldn't want to be in zone 5 our entire race unless you're running a mile, but we want to let our bodies do things that they would never otherwise be able to do on any other day because of how we have specifically prepared for this one day.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And I have a funny story to share. Well, both Elisabeth and I ran Chicago as well. So there we go. This happened at Chicago, looking at my heart rate after the fact. Right at the halfway point through mile 20, it jumped up to like the 180. I think it was hovering in like maybe like high 150s, low 160s. Like it was pretty like average for a marathon. And it jumped way up to the 180s. And my coach, after the fact, she's like, what happened? Because then it like settled down after the 20-mile mark. And I'm like, oh, do you remember seeing those videos that I was like running down the streets and I was like throwing my hands up in the air like it was a party? That was what I was doing. So I think it's good advice for anyone listening. Like if you are racing and you're looking to have a really, maybe you're focused on a time goal, you want to run a PR, save the partying and the celebration for after the fact and just stay focused in on running and just run and stay mellow and stay chill. And that's what I'm going to try and do at Boston. I've been channeling it and working on it, to stay focused in on the moment and then celebrate afterwards, and don't let your heart rate shoot way up. It did come down at mile 20, but she said, that could have impacted also kind of how I finished the race as well. So wait to celebrate with all your friends and family after you cross the finish line.
I will also say another reason I don't really advocate for using heart rate in a race is because of how most of us deploy heart rate in our training, is that it's something like how we are intentionally trying to keep our heart rate low when we pay attention to it. Like I personally do, like I know a lot about my own heart rate zones. Like I've done a lot of testing, and I do some other kind of fancier heart rate stuff with some of my athletes. Like we do threshold tests, and like we work a little bit more in depth with heart rate in some of our training. But primarily the goal of using heart rate for most people in the training is going to keep their heart rate low. And so if you're used to trying to, your mindset of keeping your heart rate low, and then on race day, you accidentally look at your watch. Like I forgot to take my heart rate. I take my heart rate off my watch faces completely when I race. I don't even want to accidentally look at it. But I raced like last year, a race that I did, and I'd forgotten to take it off, and I saw it, and I was like, I knew it was like, don't look. And I was like, oh God, it's so high. It's so, but it was supposed to be, I think it was a 5K or a 10K. It was supposed to be, but simply like seeing it because of the context that I usually look at my heart rate, I'm trying to keep it low. So even though my heart rate was in the completely correct place for where I was supposed to be in that race, just seeing it in that context was like, oh my God, my heart rate's so high. It's not something that was a value add in the moment. Let's put it that way.
I think that's really a testament to the fact that the numbers have a lot of value, and certainly numbers don't lie in many instances. However, if we lose the ability or never gain the ability to understand how we feel and to really break down like how we feel on an easy run, how we feel during a workout, how we feel at specific goal paces, if we don't acknowledge that and really digest that, and then consider how that's going to feel on race day, we lose the ability to find that full potential.
Yeah, 100%. And I've said this whole time, heart rate is one tool in your training arsenal. And the goal of using heart rate in your training is to allow you to become more connected and in tune with what's actually happening in your body, because so many of us are so divorced from how we actually feel. We are conditioned to ignore our bodies, ignore our signs of hunger or thirst, push through the pain, right? All these things that over time have taught us to ignore how we're feeling, right? And I think heart rate allows us to create a connection, to open the door to really learning how things are supposed to feel. And I have worked with a couple athletes, I've talked to a couple athletes who like genuinely, they know where their easy effort zone is. They know if they've looked at a heart rate monitor, they know because of their experience tuning into their training, the signals that they perceive, the conversational pace, like all these things, they're like, no, I know I'm in my easy zone on these days. That's awesome. Most athletes don't have that though. You are not running as easy as you think you are. And so that's when I find heart rate is a really useful tool to help those athletes specifically understand just how easy effort is supposed to feel.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of power in these perspectives, and also just the fact that it works. right? You said it earlier, so it just
Yeah.
works. So
It works.
when we can apply it and when we can drop the ego and just allow ourselves to grow and understand that the end result is the end result is multifaceted probably, but we want to get faster. We want to continue running. We want to have longevity in the sport because ultimately we love running. And it seems that heart rate training is a great method to achieving that goal.
It is. And because, like I said, it doesn't lie, right? Like it is the ultimate way for you to hold yourself accountable. And, I said this to somebody else recently, and I think for a lot of people, understanding that they are the ones in charge of their training is a really scary concept. Like, I'm not out there holding your hand as a coach. I can't force you to do anything. It is up to you to run in the correct pace or effort zone on your runs by yourself. Like, you are in charge of what you're doing. And sometimes we need a little bit of help, right? And that's when heart rate, that extra layer of accountability, helps us as humans just kind of be like, oh yeah, maybe I'm a little more ego driven than I wish I was, but the heart rate doesn't lie.
Well, Elisabeth, we thank you so much for joining us today. I definitely hope it's not the last time you join us because we chose this topic because there's so much value that comes from it and also a lot of misknowledge in this space. But we know that you have a lot more to provide. Where can our audience, if they have not already, connect with you and the Running Explained brand?
Yeah, so I hang out a lot on Instagram at Running Explained. I have podcast, the Running Explained podcast. Starting this year, I am now putting full-length episodes of the podcast on YouTube. So technically, I guess I'm also on YouTube. Go be one of the dozens who've seen my videos so far. Um, that's pretty much it. A lot to offer. We have one-on-one run coaching. We have group coaching. I have so many different training plans available for runners of all experience levels, developing master classes on a variety of topics, including one on heart rate zones. There's a whole hour-long masterclass with slides and calculators on how to set your own zones if you're interested in learning more. Yeah, and I frequently do Q&As in my stories and just here to help everybody become a better, smarter, hopefully faster runner.
It's great stuff. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you so much for all of the information that you put out every single day on social media. Elisabeth, thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much for joining us today. And I can't wait to see you in Boston and give you a big hug and cheer you on.
It's going to be so much fun. See you in April.
See you in April.